Thank you, Mr. Tenzin Namgye Dedonla. May I request Mr. Jimmy Metzel, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council and geopolitical commentator, to address the gathering.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And Tashi Dalek. It's really my tremendous pleasure and honor to be here with you today. As my close friend, former Sikyong Lobsang Sangye mentioned, Lobsang and I were fellow students together at Harvard Law School 25 years ago. Since that time, I've been deeply involved with the Tibetan people. I've been to Dharamsala multiple times. I've had the tremendous honor of meeting with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, on a number of occasions. I was honored to be a speaker at the 550 conference, where we talked about how to map out a strategic future for the Tibetan people. And all of that has been a particular honor for me because I have such tremendous respect for the values, the cultures, and the traditions of the Tibetan people, which are an inspiration and should be an inspiration to everybody on earth. And that is more valuable and more powerful than anything else. And I have tremendous respect not just for your struggle, but for the way you are engaging in that struggle. That in fighting this ultimate fight, you aren't losing your souls, but strengthening your souls. And I'm particularly honored to be here with all of you because I know that you will ultimately win this struggle. It may take a long time, but you will ultimately win for exactly the reason of everything that we're exploring here, because of the spirit that you all maintain in your hearts, because the spirit, the legacy of your tradition is indistinguishable. Lobsang and I, 25 years ago, would sit in Harvard Law School and talk about the commonalities between our two cultures, between Tibetan culture and my family history of Jewish culture, between the parallels of the terrible tragedies that the Tibetan people have lived through and the tragedy, of my community, where my father and grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and like many of you, came to this country as refugees and replanted the seed of our tradition, of our lives, of our culture. And we talked about the parallels between what it means to live in exile. For last night, actually, was the end of the Jewish ceremony of Passover. And in Passover, what we commemorate is the exodus of the Jewish people from slavery in Egypt. And they left the oppression of slavery and wandered through the desert and came to Israel, where they established their state. But even that successful story didn't last, because 2,000 years ago, the Jews lost their revolt against the Roman Empire and were expelled from Israel. They were expelled from their homeland. And for 2,000 years, they lived in exile. And for 2,000 years, at the end of every Passover Seder, they said the same thing: next year in Jerusalem. And the possibility of returning to Jerusalem for almost the entirety of that 2,000 years was very, very, very small. And it was unclear whether next year in Jerusalem meant a condition inside of people's hearts, or it referred to an actual geography, an actual place in the world that the Jewish people might someday return. But every year, year after year, next year in Jerusalem was the message. And in that time, a lot of things changed. The Roman Empire fell. Multiple empires fell. The Mongol Empire fell. European colonialism rose and fell. The First World War, Second World War. There were so many changes that would have been absolutely impossible to predict in those early years when the Jewish people were exiled from Jerusalem and from their homeland. And the thing that maintained them was this idea of Jerusalem in their hearts, of Lhasa in their hearts. We are now experiencing fundamental changes in our world today. You just need to turn on the television and you'll see what's happening. What we're experiencing in Ukraine is in many ways a shift from one understanding of the world to another. Certainly, we've all heard about the correct claims by President Biden and others that what the Russians are trying to do in Ukraine is genocide. They are trying to wipe a country and a culture off the map. And President Biden was 100% correct in making that claim. And because that claim is correct, we just need to be honest and open about what the Chinese government is seeking to do in Tibet. It is genocide. Imprisoning the Panchen Lama, preventing the Tibetan people from realizing their culture and their cultural aspirations, actually in violation of China's own constitution, it is genocide, and we need to be able to speak openly and honestly about that. What we're also seeing in the context of this crisis in Ukraine is a recognition that globalization cannot be led by economics and trade. If globalization is not guided by values, globalization is a dead end. And the world, certainly the United States and Europe, are waking up to the fact that we cannot fund the genocide against the Ukrainian people through oil and gas purchases, as is still happening today. And the logical jump from there to the next point is also essential. We cannot, and over time will not, fund trade with China's government that is funding genocide against the Tibetans, against the Uyghurs, the destruction of democracy in Hong Kong, and aggression around the world. This is going to take some time, but there is an increasing recognition that what happens in other places, even internally, inside of countries like Russia and China, where the crackdown against human rights, where aggression against other people, other communities, internal communities, may have been seen by some as their own business, we're now recognizing is everybody's business. I've been deeply involved in the issue of pandemic origins, and it is 100% clear to me that whatever the source of the initial outbreak, whether it comes from nature or a market, or as I believe, it most likely comes from a laboratory accident, there is no doubt that the unique pathologies of the Chinese government preventing brave scientists from speaking out, from sounding the alarm, that is why 15 million people have died around the world. We can no longer say that what happens in one country is just that country's business. We live as the Tibetan people understand better than anybody else in an interdependent world where our fates are intertwined. And that's why, even though this may take a very, very long time, even though there'll be ups and downs, even though, as Josh correctly said, there are going to be wins and losses, as long as you remember who you are, and looking around, I can see that you do remember who you are, that you will retain the hope, the promise of Lhasa in your hearts. And that promise of Lhasa will in part, over time, be realized in your geographic homeland of Tibet. But it will also be realized wherever you are in the world. I had the pleasure of sitting with these two amazing young women who are the granddaughters of His Holiness Rinpoche. Both of them were valedictorians of their classes. Both of them are superstar students. And when I see young people like them, the other young people, the incredible musicians, the woman with that incredibly piercing, beautiful voice who sang the American national anthem, I recognize that the future of Lhasa, the future of Tibet, is in Tibet, and it's also where you people are. Because when I look out at you and the young people and your children and their children, I see future governors and senators. I see future presidents of the United States, leaders of everything. And I see a future where over time you will get your homeland back. Because in your hearts and all of our hearts, there is a power that is much, much more powerful, much stronger than any weapons that the Chinese government possesses. It's more powerful than the bars in their prisons. It's more powerful than every airplane and every weapon that they possess. And that power is your spirit, which is indistinguishable. So on this commemoration of the 33rd birthday of the Panchen Lama, please join me in saying, next year in Lhasa. Thank you.